Avoidant attachment is one of the 3 insecure attachment styles, and it's often quite misunderstood. So today we're going to try to understand the avoidant a little bit better. Often people view the avoidant as someone who's quite cold, quite selfish, out of reach, unable to feel empathy. Sometimes people even have a difficult time deciphering between narcissism and avoidant attachment. But in fact, the avoidant attachment style and someone who has this type of attachment wound is quite wounded. So we're going to try to dive into it a little bit more in this video. Basically, there are 3 insecure attachment styles. There's anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and then fearful avoidant attachment. There's also the secure attachment, but unfortunately, a lot of people, they have either partially insecure attachment or completely insecure attachment styles. The avoidant attachment style is the type of attachment where the person who is avoidant feels quite cut off from the world. They grew up in an environment where they had to take care of themselves, where they had to be responsible sometimes for their own feelings. No one was really there to console them. No one was really there to be there for them emotionally. So this would typically be a home where, for example, all of their physical needs might be met, like they had a roof over their head, they had food on the table every day, but they were living with adults who were unable or unwilling to be there for them and take care of their emotional needs. So they grew up learning that the only one who's there for them at the end of the day are themselves. And of course, that does lead to certain selfish behaviors. Because if you can only rely on yourself, you got to take care of yourself, right? And you don't reach out to other people for support. So when an avoidant has a problem or an issue, they don't go to someone else with that problem or issue. They take care of it themselves. You'll often see that avoidants, they are overachievers. They can be very, very successful because, again, it's this every man for himself dynamic that they're living out. And yes, that can result in a lot of success, a lot of money, that sort of lifestyle. But at the same time, you don't see them having these really, really intimate relationships where they are vulnerably sharing and giving themselves to other people. So there is kind of a feeling of you can get close to an avoidant, but only to a certain point. And it actually doesn't matter if you're the spouse of this avoidant person or if you're just a friend. Even for the spouse, there's a certain point where the avoidant person won't let them in further than that, simply because they don't trust anybody. They don't trust anybody. So if someone hasn't worked through their insecure attachment as an avoidant, they don't trust anyone. They only trust themselves. And another reason why someone can become avoidant is if they have grown up in an enmeshed home. Okay, and sometimes these things, they all go together. It was a home where there was a lack of emotional vulnerability and support, and at the same time there was some enmeshment, a lack of boundaries, an adult that kept on overstepping the child's boundaries. And that can also create this need for solitude and need for extreme boundary setting as an adult, which we also see in the avoidant attachment style. And yes, it can be quite difficult to be in love with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, because you'll feel that push away. You'll feel them push you away when you try to get close. You'll see them shut down when you try to be vulnerable, or when there's any type of conflict. They'll usually shut down. They don't like talking about feelings. Many of them don't really have a high emotional intelligence because it's not something that they've practiced, and it's not something that they have been taught because they grew up in homes where that wasn't really available to them. So they don't know. They simply don't know. Because emotional intelligence is actually a skill set that you can learn. So even if you watching right now, if you're an avoidant, it's a skill set that you can also learn. But most avoidants, if they haven't worked on themselves, they haven't learned this. So we understand that it can be really difficult to be a partner and to be in love with someone who's avoidant, because you can't ever really get close to them. You can't really rely on them to support you emotionally, because they don't rely on you to support them emotionally. They don't open up to you. It doesn't matter what you do. You beg, you plead, you might have an anxious attachment style, right? You're so desperate for them to share, to be connected, to be intimate with you. And they're just shut down. They can't, or they won't. They don't even know how to. It's too scary for them to open up to another person. And sometimes this even goes for physical intimacy. Okay, some clients that I work with, they have even shut down that part of their life. That's a way that they keep their partners at arm's length, not being intimate very often, having a porn addiction sometimes, or something similar. It's quite common actually, because it's a way to distance yourself and not be as vulnerable and intimate with your partner. But here's the thing. Of course, we want our avoidants out there to work on themselves, but we gotta have some compassion for them as well, because it's actually incredibly lonely to be an avoidant. Being avoidant is a survival strategy. It's because there was no other option when they grew up. If there had been another option for them, they wouldn't have had to develop this skill of, being in the world alone and doing everything by themselves and complete self-sufficiency. They wouldn't have had to. So it's very, very lonely. And many of the avoidants that I work with, they feel so alone in this world. And they really want to open up to other people, but they just don't know how. It just feels too overwhelming because they've never done it before, right? And imagine if the only experience you have ever had of opening up to someone, if that person would shut you down or not know how to handle it, which is the case for them in their childhoods, right? Then it is a scary thing to open up. But the thing is, they need to learn that in adulthood, for example, with a spouse who really wants nothing but the best for them, it can be a safe experience to open up. And then they can actually heal a lot through that experience. So being avoidant is not the same as being narcissistic. Having NPD is a completely different thing, although there are some similarities, right? The selfishness, avoidance, like I said, they can come off pretty selfish. But at the end of the day, it's just a very lonely experience to be avoidant. And they, deep down, they really long for the closeness. Because who doesn't, right? That's what we're here for. They really long for the closeness. But to get an avoidant to open up can be a struggle. And you can't force them. Because the more you push, for example, if you have this anxious avoidant dynamic, the more you push as the anxious partner, the more they'll pull away and shut down. So either you'll see avoidants having long-term relationships where they never really open up, the classical like workaholic who he or she is never home, they're always working, they're not really available for their partner's emotional needs, etc. Or you'll simply see them distancing themselves in other ways. So if you're avoidant, I highly suggest that you seek some kind of support and some kind of help, because especially if you're avoidant, it's really important that you don't go on this journey alone, because you've been alone your whole life. So see if you can find a community, see if you can work with a professional. It's incredibly complex to understand these attachment styles and the nuances that go into it, because it's not so black and white, all of this. There are so many gray nuances in between. And even being an avoidant, you don't have to be 100% an avoidant. You can be partially secure, partially avoidant. I hope this was helpful in giving you a bit of an understanding of why the avoidants are the way that they are. And if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out and it helps the algorithm understand what kind of content you like. And I'll see you guys again soon.